Right, hello, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be looking at Vertex Painting and how we can kind of extend the functionality of Vertex Paint materials to get a bit more realism, a bit more use out of them. So, firstly, what is Vertex Painting? Well, I have here a very simple plane. We're going to be painting the vertices, so it has some subdivisions to it. The more you have, obviously the more sort of quality you can get in your, or accuracy you can get in your painting, but they do come with a cost, so you want sort of a decent balance between density for painting and then for performance. To access Vertex Painting in Unreal, we've got this tab here, and we can just come in here and I can paint in either the individual channels. I can just paint red and green, etc. Here I'm just painting red, and there's things like flood fill. If I reset this to white, I can just flood fill that in all the channels. Plenty of documentation about Vertex Painting. We're not going to go too much into this. We're more interested in sort of the material side of things, but as a quick example, here we are. We can sort of see how we're painting these. So having a quick look at this material. It is just the vertex color node. That's it, plugged into the emissive color. We have four channels of data here, 3 color and the alpha, and we can set up our material to use any of these things. Obviously this is color, but we can understand that in our material however we like in our data. So we could have, for example, base color is red, roughness is green, I don't know, world position offset is blue, whatever we want to do in our material, so we can set up those kind of like 4 different channels of data. Cool, so moving on to an actual more interesting example. I have here a couple of textures. So if I just bring in the diffuse versions, we're going to do a quick plaster over a brick wall. Let's do this and then in here. So, if we bring in vertex color, and I'm just going to use the red channel as a alpha, and I'm going to blend between my 2 RGBs using a lerp. Let's do that into base color. Now, this isn't going to be the best result, but hopefully we'll see sort of the first steps into what we're doing. So this is sort of the most common example, I guess, for what vertex color is useful for, being able to paint 2 materials between 2 materials on the same same geometry. We're getting a result here. This plane has some vertex colors in it. If I go in here and just preview the red channel, here you can see it's got some similar colors in it, but we're not getting a great result. It's just doing a soft blend between them. If you wanted to really go in and kind of highlight like a hard edge between them, you would be struggling a little bit, just to do with the resolution we've got. If I go back in here, let's just paint white. You can see we're not really able to get a nice result between these. So what's happening here is the colors are being interpolated between the vertex. So what do I mean by that? If I just go into wireframe, if this vertex here is 100% white and this vertex here is 100% black, it's going to have midtones of grey between them, and so you're always going to get that kind of soft transition. We could do some maths to this. In fact, we are going to do some maths to this to try and kind of like help break that up. But there's another thing we can do first. In our textures, we can find the right one. I've got here an ARH, that's ambient occlusion, roughness, and a height map. So I can go in here and use a height map. If I just swap my lerp for a height map, apply this, we're going to set this up to be combining. It's not the easiest thing to see by default. If I open this up and have a look at this height map, it's going to have lots of shades of grey again, so we're getting this kind of sort of soft, washed out blend between materials, where really we just want hard-edged one on one, either one or the other. And there are some tools we have to do that. So if I change this lerp, we have a what's called a height lerp. This is just an inbuilt function in the Unreal Engine. and if we blend our two RGBs, we're going to be using the height texture here, and we've got two different parameters here, transition phase and contrast. So if I plug this in, I'm just going to create a couple of parameters for this. I'm going to call transition and contrast. When using these inbuilt functions, if you mouse over, you can see what the defaults are. In this case it's both actually 0, so that's all fine. And we'll see what kind of result we get here. So obviously a 0 transition is going to be 100% brick, 1 transition is going to be 100% of the plaster, 0.5 we're still getting this sort of like soft faded, but now we have some contrast control. If we up that up to 4, 8, we can see we're getting a much better result. We're getting paint on the top of the bricks, not in the grout, and it looks like it's kind of been splashed on and worn away. So now we're using a height map. Well, how does vertex color come into this? Well, rather than using just a transition value, we can just swap our vertex color in, and now we're using a height map, and we're going to get a nicer, more refined edge. You can see down here there's some nice kind of detail being added. It's not just a simple kind of one or the other. Cool. Now this is working for the just the base color. If we wanted to do this for a material, we then have to do it for metallic, roughness, emissive, maybe normal, all these other things. We don't really want to have lots and lots of height lerps going in and again, so maybe don't delete that. There's one thing we can use, and that's the material attributes option. So here we have our material, all the different inputs are opened up. If we enable this option here, material attributes, it goes to a single pin, and then we can do a make material attributes, and we can combine our kind of our data into one material earlier in the shader and then blend those together. So if I just bring in maybe just start again from scratch. If I just bring in those textures that I need, so that's all the brick wall textures and all the plaster. So it should be those three. That's done correctly. I can do a make material attributes, and this is going to be my brick wall material. So diffuse first, base color. This is the normal, and this is the ambient occlusion, roughness, and then the height map. So there's no height map input here. Well, height maps, if they are using tessellation, would be in world displacement, and it's actually quite a nice feature of this. Is when we blend these together, it'll actually blend our height maps. So if you were blending together multiple layers of material, not just 2 but 3 or more, you'd want sort of a resultant blended height map, and you can use the sort of world displacement to do that for you. Got these in the wrong order, but there we are. Oops. Give me a second just to organise these. So there we go, ambient occlusion, roughness, and world displacement height map. So before we used a lerp first, and that gave us sort of the soft result. Here we want to blend material attributes together. You can't put these into a lerp, but there is another node, blend material attributes, that works exactly the same with our alpha. So if I do this, connect that up, here we go, apply that, we should be able to blend nicely between our two materials, and they're going to have normals and roughness and ambient occlusion and all that set up correctly, which is nice. Obviously this is then doing that soft fade again. Don't want to do this. Unfortunately there's no blend material attributes with height map. If I go in here and type in height, nothing comes up. And if we bring in our height lerp function, it's not going to be compatible with our material attributes again. We could go in and we could make our own version of this that was. I think material attributes in function inputs is a relatively new thing, or at least that's not how this one's been set up. But if we look at the outputs, we've got the results. We've also got this alpha. Now the alpha is just going to give us our height mask. So using our brick height map again. Oh, I deleted the others, didn't I? There we go. Change this transition and contrast again. Just set this up. Transition and contrast. And we're using the output from here, the alpha channel output. So that's just going to be the height, sort of combined with these two inputs. And we can use that to blend between our material attributes. So transition to 0.5. Well, that's still quite soft again, it's quite low contrast. If I stick that up to sort of something like 8, here we are, we're getting that same result as we were before. And of course if we change our transition value to vertex color, we will get that vertex painting. And now we're painting between two completely sort of independent separate materials. Obviously we can swap this out for plaster for something else if we wanted that. We could swap our brick wall for the underlying layer. We're getting the height map in there, and we're getting all the data in there, and it's a nice clean sort of way of working, blending our height maps together. So there's one other little feature I want to add. Obviously the number of vertices you have in your plane affects this, but if we look about here, you can see we're getting quite a kind of stepped edges. It's quite hard. It is taking the height map into account, so we're getting a little bit of variation along that, but we could also go in and create a bit more of a transition edge to that. So I'm just going to come in here. Oops, not that one, vertex color. If I just preview my red channel on this example, so we see we've got some red channel data painted in here, and I just want to create some noise within these grayscales. So I want the white to stay white, I want pure plaster there, I want the brick to stay brick, 100% black here, but I just want to create some noise within this gradient. So just to preview it in the material editor, rather than using vertex color, I'm going to use a linear gradient. If I plug that in, so we have here black on one side, white on the other, and I just want to create some noise in there. So to do that, I'm just going to bring in a texture. We have this macro variation texture. Obviously the type of noise you're adding is going to make a difference to the visuals. Something like this comes with the starter content. Some quite natural, realistic noise here, lights and darks. We're going to have control over sort of the contrast and stuff here in our shader as well. So what we want to do, we want to add some noise to the darks. So if I just take my gradient and I add a single channel in, preview this, there we are, we now have some noise in our dark area, but we've lost that sort of original gradient. We've also lost that kind of black line. We wanted our 0, our 100% black, to stay 100% black. So if we multiply our original gradient back in again, let's preview this. Now we have values of 0 at this end. That's been multiplied by 0, so we know that's 0. We've got values over 1 here. It started out at 1 and we added to it, so it must be over 1 now. And we've got noise in the middle. So if I just bring in a cheap contrast function, give it a scalar input, well, this is going to give us a little bit what we want, but these values are over 1 here, so we need to clamp this down. There we are. So I turn off the preview, and there we are. So this contrast value with 0 is going to give us that sort of soft gradient. Still has black at the end, still has white at the other end, but there's a lot of kind of soft noise within that. But if we just bring that contrast value up, and there we are, we've got full black on one side, full white on the other, and kind of like a noisy transition. And obviously the noise makes a big difference. If I change the tiling, if I set that to say 0.5 by 0.5, I'm just going to change that noise scale. That's going to make a big difference on that as well. So if we just apply this, and then have a look at our shader. Here we are. So I plugged the vertex color in. So this linear gradient, this was just a preview. Actually what we want to do is plug in our vertex color, and we should get a nice controllable shader. Still paint it wherever we want. If I paint in red, here we are. So we can paint our red, but where these kind of like harder edges, they're still going to be roughly square, but you can see now here this is a much more natural shape. If I just plug that straight into the emissive for comparison, we're going to get this soft transition, very triangle-y, very artificial, no good for anything natural at all, but we can run it through a little bit of noise just to break up that edge, and then we can combine that back with our height map. So what I've done with this setup, it's the kind of thing I'm going to do multiple times, so I've just converted it to a material function. So if we just open that up, add noise to gradient, has a nice name that explains what it does. Exact same setup, so I've changed the input gradient, so the gradient, to be an input, the noise tiling and noise texture, and then the contrast. And you can see here from the result, it's just doing a preview based on the UV gradient as exactly as we just had. So if I go back to our wall here, we've got some height map information in here, but you can kind of still see those sharp corners. Well, if I open this up, find where the vertex color is, give myself a little bit more space, and then if I call in a function, add noise to gradient, here we are. So the gradient is the vertex color red, the result goes into the transition phase, and I'm just going to give myself a couple more parameters here. So edge noise, contrast, and edge noise, tiling. Up to you if you want to expose these parameters to be editable per instance, depends how you're using it. Might be that you set up specific values for your examples, but now we can see, as well as having that kind of height map influence, we've got control of our edge as well. So I think a value quite low tiling is going to give us a nice result. So quite low frequency noise, just sort of scrubbing it through till it looks about right. So 0.1 maybe, and then we can change the contrast, how much that's affecting sort of the noise, and then also the contrast of how much the height map influence is having. Obviously we can invert it, it's maybe not what we want, but a little bit of coming in over here, breaking that up. And obviously this is completely combinable with our painting, so as well as having control over all our edges, we can just come in and paint these. We're getting quite a nice realistic example, or realistic response from quite a low density mesh, and we're doing the kind of like the material is doing that work for us. Let's paint some mid-grey. You can see we're getting kind of some noise between things, looking pretty nice. So hope that helps. Obviously this is extendable if you wanted to add another one on, just to sort of show you that as an example. So here we've blended our material attributes together. Well, this node here, this is make material attributes. The opposite of that would be break material attributes, and this is going to give us all that sort of input, sort of the different channels of data. Now what I was saying before about the world displacement, so here I've plugged these two height maps in, they've been blended using our noise and height here. So now if I wanted to blend another layer on top, I could use this pin here, world displacement. If I just multiply by 1 and preview, that's not going to work too well, is it? Because that's not set to have any input data. So there's no vertex colors that exist in the preview, which is why we're only getting one end. But if I do this, and let's just plug emissive into world displacement, hopefully if I've done this correctly, what we should see is the sort of the two height maps been blended together. So here we've got the plaster bit where we've got the higher white height map, and then the brick height map underneath. So it's quite a nice way of of working if you then wanted to blend a third layer on top. So yeah, hopefully that helps. As always, let me know if you have any questions, comments, etc. Thank you for everyone who supports me on Patreon. It's really nice to know that these are appreciated. And yeah, and I'll see you all next time.